Good morning, holy Yidden. If you need me to pause the recording, let me know. Good morning, holy Yidden, and welcome. Thank you for joining us on our daily Chabura to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Right now, Mesech Shabbos, Perek Tisha Asar, chapter 19, Kuf Lamed Vav Amud Beis 136b. I should say which date it is. It is the 26th of Tishrei, October 21st. We're starting to get chilly weather here in Miami. It's a brisk 72 Fahrenheit. And we're hopeful that some of our out-of-towners might join us in the flesh at some point in the coming months. But anyways, we're here to study the Talmud, and we were in midst of a discussion, a long discussion about the tragic possibility of a baby passing within 30 days of birth and their halachic status potentially being a nofel. It was introduced to us several weeks ago. Okay, maybe a week ago in Gemara years. Of course, we had some time in the interim where we were off, and we were introduced to the question of how do you do a bris if the baby might not be viable, and what would that bris be considered? Would it be a malacha if you did it on Shabbos? And from there, we went through a series of discussions on the subject of infant mortality and the laws of a nefel. We compared it to a similar halacha when it comes to livestock, where there are two, an animal that's newly born is not considered certainly viable until after 8 days, or actually it's a machlokes, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim. We brought a number of halachic ramifications, most recently a question of a yibum chalitza question. In other words, God forbid a woman loses her husband and they are childless with the exception of the baby in utero. So what do you do? The baby is born and it doesn't live out 30 days. Does the widow, have to undergo yibum? Can she get remarried? And sometimes it's a no-brainer. You go to the rabbi, do a chalitza. Do a chalitza misafek? No big deal. Of course, it's more of a big deal when that woman is already betrothed to be married, and therefore it could be quite a problem. When is it a problem? Particularly if that man is a Kohen. And so there was a machlokes how to react between two students of Ravina, and Rav, what was his name? Rav Shravya. And we closed out yesterday's Gemara with one of the all-time Talmudic insults, where he said, Yehi Rava, the Tishri Tarba or Tarcha. Maybe Hashem's will, for your extensive leniency, you'll make other mistakes, which will prove my point against yours. Okay. An alternative interpretation might be that you will permit a divorcee to marry a Kohen. Either way, he was trying to say what he was trying to say in a very poetic language is you are starting a slippery slope. That here is kind of easy to be matir, but down the road, down the way, you could come to be in much more questionable territory. That is the essence of that comment, as I understand. And that concluded our lengthy discussion about infant mortality, nefel, suffix, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months. All of that discussion for now has drawn to a close, and we're now ready to revisit another somewhat complex discussion. And I guess I mean the discussion of the androgynous. And some of our questions that we asked way back when may be partially, hold on, I think I shared the screen wrong, may be partially answered. So let's get the right text. By the way, my son came home from school. He's learning Gemara now. So I told him that, yesterday in the Gemara, we looked at a manuscript of the Talmud, a handwritten manuscript. So I showed him that I found on Sefaria, from the same Shas, the Gemara Bava Metzia that he's learning. And also we had the opportunity to look at the handwritten manuscript. And we noted a number of shorthand and variants in the language of the Mishnah as presented. And so what happens in the Talmud Chabura sometimes moves on into the real world. So, all right, let's see. Okay, no, I'm going the wrong direction. Okay, bear with me just a moment. And again, welcome to all the expert scholars of our Chabura. And here well, let's just go to the last thing. Let me see if we missed any commentary. No. So here we go. Actually, give me one more second. Let's just look at if Rabbi Steinsaltz. This might be something Rabbi Steinsaltz could comment on. Let me open up the Steinsaltz Gemara, see if he gives us any gems on the matter. No. All right, let's begin. Rabbi Yehuda Matir. So now we are quoting a Mishnah that we studied long ago. The Mishnah we studied long ago was also about different sfeikot, different circumstances that may or may not be done on Shabbos. And the Tanna Kama, as I recall, says, do not do a bris for an androgynous or a suffix from Ben Hashmashis or other scenarios that are not entirely certain. Wait till Sunday. Rabbi Yehuda Matir. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you can actually do the bris of an androgynous on Shabbos. Just to remind you, an androgynous is a baby or a human being that is born with both male and female genitalia. And there is something that appears to be a conventional or male organ with an arla, with a foreskin, and therefore there is a bris to be done. The shaila is, what is the status of this baby, male, female, or a third category? Excuse me. And so Rav Yehuda says you do the bris. At the time, well, let's see the Gemara. Amar Rav Shizvi, Amar Rav Chizda. Although Rav Yehuda, Rav Shizvi quoted Rav Chizda to say, Loi lakol, not for every halachic matter. Amar Rabbi Yehuda androgynous zacharhu. Does Rabbi Yehuda take the position that an androgynous is absolutely, certainly a male halachic? Because again, in the context of doing a bris on Shabbos, if you say that you do the bris on Shabbos, you're essentially declaring that this baby is absolutely a zachar. Therefore, there is no suffix. Therefore, you give the bris. Don't suppose that he applies this perspective to all halachis of an androgynous. Because as we know in Jewish law, there are a number of times where the distinction of different genders matter. Bris needn't be said, usually, but there are other times as well. So I think the thing that comes to mind naturally and most commonly would be mitzvah saseh shazman grama, right? Mitzvot that are time bound, women can do, but they are not compelled. They're not halachically obligated to do them. And here we're going to find another halachic matter where there is
Rabbi,
a difference. Yes?
I remember a discussion, Talmudic discussion, for this kind of person regarding marriage.
Yes. But here, okay, no.
No, I'm just saying there are other.
Well, that's another. Anytime that there are male and female specific halachas, roles, or obligations, there's going to be a question for the poor individual who is an androgynous.
I guess we're just saying Rabbi Yehuda would not automatically permit everything.
Yeah, so even though when it comes to the bris, Rabbi Yehuda says, do the bris. That's not Rabbi Yehuda taking a broad position on all halachic questions of the halachas of an androgynous. Let's read Rashi. Loilikol davar amar Rabbi Yehuda, the androgynous zachar. Not in every scenario does Rabbi Yehuda say the androgynous is a zachar. Elale'inyin mila bilvad. His commentary is exclusively reserved for mila. The yalif le'mi riboy dekrakid lekaman. We're going to see the pasuk includes. And I imagine the point is going to be, we say, Aral Kal Zachar, this baby has the male or male foreskin. So for the very narrow question of do you have to remove this male foreskin, Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to see it inside, but Rabbi Yehuda would say you have to do bris. Why? Shemata Omer Kain, if that is so. When it comes to a question of erichin, this baby would have the value of a male. Let me explain more specifically what we're talking about. Okay, I'm going to give you just a general. Erichin is a segment in the Torah that describes that if a person says he's going to contribute the value of an individual, we don't actually make the person give the erech. We don't ask him to assess the net worth or any other kind of equation of value for this person. There are canned set amounts for different kinds of people of different ages and genders. 20 through 50 or 60, as you may recall, was one amount. Below that, less. Above that, less. There's a distinction between male and female, etc. If you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda says the androgynous is a zachar, well, then that would resolve a discussion about erichin. What discussion? The discussion that's going to be quoted the next breath. Are you certain that a androgynous cannot be evaluated in the question of erichin, of contributing the value, or I should say donating the value of this individual? The Tanya, yeah, there's a brisa that clarifies halachic restriction when it comes to erichin, value of donation. The brisa says, Zachar, if we're talking about the erech, the assessed value of a male, Hazachar excludes loy tumtum ve'androgynous, not a more ambiguous scenario. Rashi, ha zachar, hey yisera kadarish. The gabinif keva darish ve'im yisera v'loy tumtum androgynous. So unfortunately, when it comes to the question of erichin, there is a careful reading of the psukim that excludes the androgynous and the tumtum, an ambiguous gender, from being classified as zachar or nekeva in the halachic conversation of erichin. Let's read the brisa. Obviously, this opens up a lot of avenues for discussion and many questions, but let's first read the text. The brisa says, "Hazachar v'loy tumtum androgynous yachal lo yehi berach ish, ava yehi berach isha." Maybe then the tumtum and androgynous, two different types of human beings whose gender status, and I'm using this unspecifically because I know today there's a lot of diuk in gender, and I'm just using it in the old-fashioned sense of maybe they should be considered with the halachas of the female when it comes to donating their value. Talmud loimer hazachar v'im nekeva hi zachar vadai nekeda vados. There needs to be certainty in the gender of the individuals. V'loy tumtum v'loy androgynous. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz's filling in the blanks, and then I'll welcome any questions with the caveat that we're not necessarily going to have answers to every question I'll be asked. From where do we derive that he is not evaluated? I know someone's going to be medaik in the language of Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation that you call the tumtum and androgynous a he in the very breath where we're denying their malehood. The Gemara doesn't make that comment. It's the translation. And as it was taught in the Sifra, which is the halachic medrash on Vayikra, then your valuation shall be for the male from 20 to 60, blah, blah, blah. When the sages read the words hazachar, the male, it means someone who is obviously, clearly, and unambiguously a male, not a tumtum or a hermaphrodite. I might have thought that they would not be valued as a man, but they should be valued according to the nekeva. The pasuk rules that out. Hazachar v'im nekeva. Only a definite zachar and a definite nekeva, but not someone who is essentially a third category.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I imagine, unfortunately, today the Beis Din will be looking at this section of the Talmud very often. Unfortunately.
if I can answer you honestly and candidly, I don't think so, because I don't think there are more tumtum and androgynous today than any time in history. Today, we're dealing obviously with another very sensitive and topic, which I will not weigh in just because of the extreme sensitivity of it. But if we're going to be honest, here we're talking about a true, what we might call intersex or androgynous hermaphrodite. That I think is going to be just as, I hope, just as rare or prevalent as it ever was, because that's not really as subject to social the fluidity of the social sense or whatever.
I know we don't.
But admittedly, this is used to weigh into that conversation, and I'm just avoiding it, not to disrespect, but to avoid weighing in on a very highly sensitive and personal topic. There are people that are, impacted by it, and so I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment on something that I'm not really qualified.
No, but as inappropriate as it might be, what's happening today is someone could be turned
What I'm trying to say, in
I
other
know,
words,
is get out of there. I
No,
understand.
is that I don't want to talk about what's happening today out of an abundance of sensitivity and love to anyone who may be immediately impacted by it, and I don't want to be insensitive or disrespectful.
No, I'm not.
And
I'm not offering an opinion.
And I don't think I even have the tools to effectively be sensitive in my desire to be sensitive, and so therefore, the best thing I could do right now is to not weigh in on that topic.
Amen.
I'm starting to learn. I know I'm still in the beginning of my career. I'm learning that the more I know that I don't know, which sounds like a line. I think that the Kutzker.
Rabbi, there's a wonderful English expression. The first rule when you're in a hole, stop digging.
Oh, but I don't think I'm in a hole. I think I'm just trying.
No, I'm just saying for me. I'm saying for me. God forbid, not for you. God forbid.
Okay. Anyways, so again, we're talking here about a very rare, but we know scenario that can happen, and there is a very clinical discussion, and I use the word clinical to mean devoid of the obvious deep emotional reality of anyone who's impacted by these conditions. But there is a technical halachic question about the gender status of these individuals. And for the purpose of Erechin, the psukim indicate that ambiguous doesn't get classified as a zoch and doesn't get classified as an nekeva. This is not, I just want to clarify, this is not in any sense denying the humanity of these individuals. All it is saying is that when it comes to somebody wanting to donate a how do you call it? A standard value per individual, well, we don't have clarification on what the androgynous value is because they're not referenced in this conversation in the Torah. Ustam Sifra Rabbi Yehuda. How do we know that this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? Because this is a quote from the Sifra, which again we describe here. Rabbi Steindl nicely describes as halachic medrash on Vayikra, and if it's not unattributed, the default attribution is to Rabbi Yehuda, and so we see that although Rabbi Yehuda has a very strong halachic psak that this individual should get a bris, he is similarly clear when it comes to Erechin that this individual does not get classified as a Zachar or as a Nekeva for the purposes of Erechin. And so this is an important clarification that Rabbi Yehuda wasn't taking an absolute position, it's a case-specific position. That's all the Gemara just said. Omar, Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, Afanan Amitanena, we have similarly learned in a Mishnah, Hakol Ksherim Lekadish. So this is going to be another question. A question about sprinkling the Mei Chatos. Mei Chatos is the ashes of the Para Aduma that are used to administer ritual purity after coming in contact with a corpse. So, Hakol Ksherim Lekadish. Everyone is permitted to be engaged in the process that we're going to call here Lekadish. Rashi says Mei Chatos. L'seis Efer Alamayim. Chutz, Micheresh, Shoita, V'Katan, with the exception of a Cheresh, a person that was a deaf mute, a Shoita and a Katan, which in times past, all three of them were understood to not have das. A child by virtue of their maturity, a Shoita by virtue of their inability or the way that, and a Cheresh, in times past, this person that could not hear and also could not communicate was not of this world, and they weren't able to make judgment calls with the same experience and sense as the average human being. Today, Baruch Hashem, we think of, Ann Keller and others, or I'm sorry, Helen Keller, who, Baruch Hashem, there is a greater degree of ability to educate and to communicate. And so that's an interesting question, obviously not for now, but just to point out.
So today, would they consider Cheresh not possible for Eidos?
Well, a Cheresh, by virtue of their disability, has probably a limited ability to observe the fullness of experience, and it magnifies the pain of a Cheresh. But forget testimony, but do they have agency for other kinds of decisions where a person needs to be able to make a well-educated decision? And it's likely that if they are able to communicate intelligently, they would be considered an intelligent individual, and they would not necessarily be they would not necessarily have all of the restrictions. But again, that's a question for contemporary poskim based on a careful reading of the Gemara and Halacha to determine. But certainly today there are individuals who are able to, or the alternative would be a person who was not born a Cheresh, but God forbid, with the passage of time, lost their capacity for hearing. That doesn't mean that they're unintelligent. So they would have.
Whoa.
We would understand that they have obviously agency and intelligence and whatever else. All right, Rabbi Yehuda Machshir B'Katan. Rabbi Yehuda, and again, we're not going to really elaborate here on the reasoning. He actually says a Katan may be engaged, a male Katan. Upaisel B'Ishav Androgynous, but he disqualifies a woman, an androgynous. The reason is, at least right now, beyond the topic of conversation, but the point is, for some matters, Rabbi Yehuda comfortably would consider the androgynous to be an Isha. And so the point is, as far as how Rabbi Yochanan halachically views the androgynous, sometimes like male, sometimes ambiguous, sometimes as a female. And we don't today, based on our brief touch on the subject, have a clarity on exactly what his global view on androgynous is. Suffice it to say, it's not always that certain. It's case specific. That's the point we're making.
I think, from what I understand, if I remember correctly, an androgynous can only marry a woman, cannot marry a male. And I think the reason is because the Oraisa, there's an Isur Mishkat Zachar. And therefore, if the androgynous is possibly, if it's more of a Zachar, then even though he's got both parts, I think because of the worry about Mishkat Zachar, that's why they said he can only marry a woman.
I honestly don't recall. I mean, I know that I've learned those Masechtas that discuss it, but I do not recall that specific conversation. What I can say is that there's another issue, which is that a male, under most circumstances, is not meant to marry someone who is infertile. That's not a blanket statement, but there are certain types of infertility that certain male, because the way Torah view, and again, now is your barrel where you might say I'm digging a hole, but I'm not digging a hole. Generally speaking, Jewish law, again, generally speaking, with many exceptions and caveats, but generally speaking, the biblical view of marriage is marriage that brings to the potential for procreation, reproduction. And therefore, there are restrictions for under certain situations for a male to marry someone who is clearly biologically infertile and incapable of child rearing. There's a different term for that in the Gemara, an islandess, someone who doesn't develop conventional female maturity. And so without getting into all of it, because there are many exceptions. But the point is that so it's also likely that an androgynous would, at the very least or the very most, have those inabilities as well. And so that might also be something to consider, but I am not fresh on the subject, and so I don't recall. But let's come back to our point here for a moment. Being that Rabbi Yehuda considers the androgynous's halachic status in every halachic question from a unique and distinct pair of lenses, why would he subject the androgynous? Well, not subject. Why would he be confident enough to say that the androgynous gets a bris even on Shabbos? And that's the Gemara's question. And here's the Gemara's answer. Ma'ishna. So why by circumcision does Rabbi Yehuda say the androgynous is considered a zachar? Mishum dechsiv himol lachem kol zachar. Circumcise every male. The word kol really is unnecessary, because had it written himol lachem zachar, it also mean circumcise your males. So what's kol? To include an unlikely or uncertain scenario. What scenario would that be? It would be the scenario of the androgynous, a human being that has a male genitalia, even though their status is somewhat ambiguous. So anyone that could be included as a zachar, even if there is a question, according to Rabbi Yehuda's reading, warrants a bris, and therefore the bris is given even on Shabbos, on the 8th day. All right, that concludes a lengthy Mishnah with some not common discussions, topics of discussion. I would like to open the floor with a reminder that we're going to try to be sensitive and stick to the topics that were brought up in our Gemara, and we'll do our best. If not, and when we finish any conversation that will ensue, we will continue to the new Mishnah. Anyone? All right. Actually, we should do no.
Rabbi, you could check me, but if I remember correctly, it's in Moed Katan. You have a whole. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I know you're correct. There are a number of places where this discussion. All righty. Okay, let's start a new Mishnah. I may end a few minutes early today, just because. Well, anyways, let's start the new Mishnah. A person that has two babies. What is the situation of having two babies? Are we talking about a single parent couple? Are we talking about a mohel?
Are we talking about twins?
Talking about twins?
Twins.
So let's take a look.
No, it's not twins because they are circumcised at different times.
Well, is it possible
It's possible twins.
that a baby is delivered at 6 and the next baby is delivered at 7, and one baby and they have different birthdays, even though they're twins?
Exactly.
They're born just on each side of twilight. Again, it's probably not as improbable as many other of the improbable scenarios we've discussed. Now, that would be awkward. Talk about trying to make a bar mitzvah. Imagine you have two twins, bar mitzvahs one day apart. I know you do. Well, hopefully you don't have a situation where one baby is bar mitzvah, one boy is bar mitzvah on Shabbos, and the next boy is bar mitzvah on Sunday, because then you're really in trouble. But you could probably make the party in the night of, or something to that effect.
I don't want to mention the word triplets.
Yeah, triplets, man dechar shmei, triplets. Well, I don't think you can get 3 different days. That would be a little bit of a stretch.
Good wording. Stretch.
No, but the one in between, which way does he go? Anyway.
Can you
If you're
imagine?
lucky, it's a
these
girl
things-
in between.
I mean, it could get even worse than that because there's a scenario of a Iber year, a leap year. So what if you have baby A is born, twin A is born before sundown on the last of the month of Adar Rishon, and the next baby is born on Aleph of Adar Sheni. The year of the bar mitzvah, the younger twin will have his bar mitzvah 1 month before the older twin, because on a regular year we overlay both dates of Adar onto 1 month, and so there is a possibility of the baby twin on Rosh Chodesh and the older twin on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Oh, anyways, the final day of Nisan, and other interesting kind of scenarios like that. Hold on 1 second. All right, so we'll keep it somewhat vague as we explore the Mishnah, just so that we can fill in our information as we develop in the Gemara. Misha hayolay shteitin guys, you had to give a bris to 2 children. Echad lamol achar haShabbos, 1 baby was going to have the bris on Sunday. The echad lamol b'Shabbos, and the other one is meant to have the bris on Shabbos. V'shochach umol es shel achar haShabbos b'Shabbos. And mistakenly, they gave the bris to the baby who's supposed to be tomorrow today. So what do you do now with the remaining baby? Well, no. First question. So you gave a bris to the wrong baby. Now let's think about this.
Oh,
A baby who's not 8 years old doesn't need to have a bris. And what you've done is not really the act of a bris. So you should bring a korban chatas. You should bring a sin offering. You drew blood, not in the act of a bris on Shabbos. Chayiv. Rashi.
Then the second baby didn't have his bris bismano on top of it.
That's unless maybe they remembered. So the question is then going to become, okay, so you probably would have to go back and do the right bris for the right baby.
the question is, did the Moel get paid?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, is there malpractice?
Yeah.
The ta'ah bidvar mitzvah v'loy asa mitzvah. Although the mistake was in regards a mitzvah, he didn't do a mitzvah. And the baby now has a wound that was not warranted. Even Rabbi Shua, who would generally be more lenient, would agree here that you have to bring a korban chatas for being Mechal Shabbos by mistake. He's liable to bring a sin offering because he performed the prohibited labor of causing a wound, not in the framework of performing a mitzvah, as no obligation yet exists to circumcise the baby. Now, again, under normal circumstances, they called kvater, and they delivered the baby to the moyel.
Rabbi, it's not so difficult to believe. If you had identical twins in those days, it seems to me a reasonable possibility.
Well, how would they have ever discovered the mistake?
Somehow they discover it when it's too late.
Maybe when they went to name the baby right after, they said, no, that's the other baby.
Right. Maybe they scanned after Shabbos. They scanned the barcode on the baby's.
Or maybe they found some difference after the fact.
Right.
It's not so unusual, anyway.
It's not. Yeah, it's not impossible to happen, especially probably in a time past where there were. But yeah, mistakes happen. Echad lamol be'erev Shabbos. Now a different scenario. One baby was meant to have a bris on Friday. The next baby is supposed to have a bris on Shabbos. The shachach umal es shel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. The moil didn't arrive on Friday, so the Friday baby didn't get his bris. A bris shaloi bismana, you wait till Sunday, right? So in principle, this baby should not have had a bris. But on the other hand, he has a chiyuv to have a bris. Rabbi Eliezer mechayiv. Rabbi Eliezer says you have to bring a chatas because this baby should not have had the bris on Shabbos. But Rabbi Yeshua poiter, and Rabbi Yeshua says no, you are poiter. Why does Rabbi Eliezer say that you are chayiv? because we don't push aside Shabbos for a baby that's more than 8 days old. Why does Rabbi Yeshua say pater? Because although we should not have done the bris, the act of the bris was a mitzvah. Unlike the premature, the baby that's 7 days old. There is no mitzvah to give a bris to a 7-day-old baby. All that you did was a malacha. Rabbi Yeshua says this 9-day-old baby, admittedly, we should have waited till Sunday, but the act that was done was the act of a mitzvah.
Well,
I have a
the
question.
chatas, has nothing to do with the mitzvah. It has specific to do with the avera.
But even though we don't advise,
You did a mitzvah, is you get the schar for the mitzvah, but it's not, doesn't putter you from.
let's read Rashi. Let's see if he gives us more.
Kavana, Reb Menachem, Kavana.
I have a question.
But kavana has nothing to do with the action.
Go ahead, Ali.
So the question I want to ask, say right now he did a bris before 7 days. Could he say something after 8 days and do a little chip after also?
They'd have to do that, but right now that's not what we're thinking about. Right now we're worrying about the culpability, of the moil for being Machal Shabbos. There is another question about what you should do to the baby, but right now we're asking the question of the status of the moil. Did the moil desecrate Shabbos inadvertently? In scenario B, where the baby was already past 8 days and is chayav a bris, we have a machlokes. Let's read Rashi. Let's see if Rashi gives us better, more helpful language, Reb Menachem, to see. Let's see if he adds anything that we were looking for. Echad lamol b'Shabbos v'echad lamol b'erev Shabbos. V'shachach u'mal she'erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. Obviously, you also forgot to do the bris on the erev Shabbos. That's also not great. The mila shaloi bizmana, an untimely bris, meaning the bris that's not 8 days, einoi doiche Shabbos, doesn't push aside Shabbos. Even though the mistake that was made was the mistake that culminated in a mitzvah. I'm sorry, folks. Give me just a second. I have to answer this call. I'm sorry. Hang on.
I'm just wondering if the parents give the moil the baby, why are the parents off the hook completely?
They didn't do the actual avera.
Rabbi,
He's on the phone.
he's still on the phone.
Yeah.
I mean,
The parents, you're right, Beryl, the parents gave it to the kvata. You don't ask, is this the right baby? You're
listen,
right.
they're identical twins. How would somebody know that he had to?
No, but they're responsible. You're right, but you're right. They are initiating the act of here.
Exactly. The moil,
Right.
the moil says, "This is my baby." What is he supposed to do?
Right.
Imagine kids that are switched. That happens sometimes altogether.
It's okay.
It happens.
Worse operations happen sometimes, unfortunately, even in hospitals, unfortunately.
I have a case right now. Rosalie's son, she has a baby just a month old. She developed some kind of infection in her breast. She's in the hospital 2 days. They're waiting for some specialist to drain it. Finally, her aunt goes to the breast clinic. They didn't know that she was in the room waiting for the specialist to come, spent 3 days in the hospital for what should have been 2 hours. Thank God it was, not life-threatening, but you have to be very careful. It's they're rushing from one to the other. We criticize what was going on 500 years ago. What's doing at La Mer, Bernie?
Don't ask. I'm totally, really. What's doing has to do with discrimination against disabled individuals, period.
Not only that, it's such a stupid matter that could be settled. So what does it bother a guy who
Right.
wants a lift if we end up with a ramp? That's what I'm trying to figure out. What bothers them?
No, but they don't want, but none of those people are disabled. These are just people who are power hungry, can show that they could do whatever they want to do. So
Yeah, I'd like the ramp for luggage when I'm schlepping stuff. Nothing to
okay,
do
but
with
that's a separate issue. That's not a legally protected issue. But
yeah.
disabilities are a legally protected issue, and they're going to get themselves.
When the power goes out, what do you prefer? What about the legal action? They have to do something, or they're ignoring it?
Folks, I'm sorry about
Just
that.
light a candle. Just
Okay,
light a
Rabbi,
candle. if the
sorry.
power
I'm
goes
sorry.
out.
I'm sorry. Whatever. Long story. Basically, we have a guy who's in trouble, and someone else was helping him out. So I didn't want to miss.
Rabbi,
Yes.
my question was, why is the moil the one who has to suffer for this mistake? What about the parents who gave him the baby, identical twins? What's he supposed to do?
So you're asking an interesting question, but ultimately, ein shlichut ledvar avera. There's no agency when you're doing something wrong. So if what you did, if the act that you did was, I mean, this is a complex and very good question. But ultimately, the guy with the knife did the chabura. It's not intentional. Hashem forgives him, but the atonement process includes bringing a carbon in temple times. And so that's what we're talking about. Chayev chatas.
What about the responsibility of the parents?
So there may be a responsibility, but that's more of a spiritual and ethical responsibility, whereas the act was done by the guy who did the act. And again, I'm reminding you that when a moyel does a bris, it's on behalf of the parents. He's a shliach of the parents. The whole notion of agency to be a shliach works lidvar mitzvah and not lidvar avera. We're not going to disbar the moyel. He's not going to get stoned. He's not going to be looked at any less honorably. We're not going to put up pashkevil in all over Yerushalayim saying this moyel was Michal Shabbos. No, he did his job. He arrived to the bris. He circumcised the baby that was delivered to him by the father. But when he finds out that it was actually a mistake, the act he did was a mistake in malacha. Dr. Hammer?
I fully agree with Reb Beryl, because in most brisim that I've been to, that give it to the papa, then it gets up, right? Someone like Kisei Shel Eliyahu, and the Moel always says, usually with a joke, you have a responsibility, Reb Yid, to circumcise your son. If do you want to do it, or do you want to ask me to be your shaliach and do it? So the parent there, it's forget about that he gave it to the kfata, right on the spot. He's the one telling the Moel. So the Moel is following clearly a direction. And to say that if you're doing a favor, following a direction like that, you are responsible, to me sounds...
He's not responsible.
Indefensible. It's like you're telling me that's kosher. I ask you, can I eat that? That's kosher. And I eat it. And then it's treif. And you say, well, I thought
so the whole institution of the chatas is the response for an entirely inadvertent and mistaken thing. So chatos by definition means you didn't, couldn't, and shouldn't have known, but you found out. And so, Dr. Hammer, you're helping make my point. A mohel can be the agent of the father to do a bris. The mohel had no way of knowing. He was totally set up. But ultimately, what we're saying here, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he did an inadvertent act of Chilul Shabbos. Why? Because the baby really wasn't meant to have a bris today. His insurance rates don't go up, nothing. But he has to bring a chatas, which is what a Jew did in temple times when they did an inadvertent mistake. Now, you're asking, Dr. Amar, a very good question. Why don't we just put that onto the parents? They set up the moyel. If the parents can't tell the kids apart, you think the moyel can? So what he did should have been the agent. He should have been just an agent to represent the father. If when it was a mitzvah, there was agency, there was shlichut. There should have also been shlichut to do the mistake. But the answer is that there is not such a thing as being an agent, as a shliach, l'dvar avera. So ultimately, there's kavod. Now, the reason why I don't want to go further is because the Gemara is going to discuss in more depth exactly what it means that he's chayiv and how could it. So this is not the end of the conversation. This is the beginning of the conversation. Let's read this Rashi one more time, if you don't mind.
Rabbi,
keep these questions fresh because they're good questions. They're important questions.
Rabbi, so just in general, are we now asking the question, if you do something that causes another person to have an avera, do you have a responsibility? That's basically where we are, no?
You have an ethical responsibility, but the person who makes the mistake also has their own process to do. So, for example, you go to a kosher restaurant. There's a big fat sign that says kosher, and there's a mashkiach with a long beard, and he has a magnifying glass, and he's inspecting every leaf of lettuce. So you know he's hardcore. And somehow yet, one ends up eating something that's not kosher. You're not a bad guy. You're not disbarred. You're not subject to punishment. But in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, that person would have a degree of atonement. I'm going to refrain from saying chatas because chatas is only for something that would have skila or kars.
Rabbi, it makes common sense because if the guy did not know intentionally or did know intentionally, you still have to bring to the Midrash.
So shogeg means
if we don't have it now, what do we do?
Say Hashem, I'm sorry. I inadvertently ate non-kosher food. Hashem, I am sorry. And
we had that with the butchers that we find on that.
There was a story just now in Teaneck, I think.
Rabbi,
Chinese restaurant under Ashkacha.
Yeah.
And they discovered that he was shipping in non-kosher chicken from Costco or something, from Restaurant Depot. And the tragedy of it is the old mashkiach was screaming that you can't trust this restaurant, they're doing things. And the agency brought a new mashkiach, and they were confident that it was kosher. And now it's a big shanda, a big scandal. And it's hurting that hashkacha is taking a very big hit in their, and they're a reputable hashkacha, and they're taking a very, very big hit. How they could have allowed that to happen.
In
I think
Teaneck?
it's in Teaneck, or it's somewhere in
I haven't heard
that in Teaneck.
I haven't heard that.
And the Chinese restaurant in Teaneck is owned by a former mayor from guy.
and it's not Teaneck, and maybe it's in New Jersey.
Englewood would be the same thing. It would be the RCBC. It's Bergen County.
No. So it's not the Bergen County. No. This is just think it's not the Bergen County Ashkacha. No, it's a different.
So it's not Teaneck, not Englewood, not this whole area. Unless we only have what we have here is RCBC. We have Kaf K, and we have Chabad
And OU.
and OU. No,
That's
but
it.
the Ashkacha usually is the RCBC. They won't really let anybody else in.
Hang on, I'm taking a look. Oh no, it was in Manalapan. I'm sorry.
how do we square this situation with the statement that you shouldn't put a stumbling block in front of the blind?
So what's the contradiction?
That's the responsibility of the parent. They put the stumbling block, or they told it's kosher.
Right.
But it's not.
So here's my understanding. The parents did not intentionally either. Everybody made a mistake. Obviously, to set somebody up, that's a much bigger issue. There's a bigger degree of culpability for if somebody, let's say you innocently ate a turkey sandwich, and you find out that actually it wasn't turkey, it was another kind of whiter toned meat. Well, your friend that handed it to you, if they did it intentionally, that's placing a stumbling block. That's a very big problem that that friend would have to deal with. But in a case where everybody's innocent, ultimately the person who did the act has a degree of atonement for inadvertent sins. On Yom Kippur, we talk about the things that we did bishgaga, and we understand that Hashem easily and rapidly atones for such sins. Okay. But but the point of our Gemara is making here is that ultimately there is a chatas. There is some in it. It was all unintentional. Again, let's read Rashi, and then then we're going to close out this Gemara because it's almost time anyways. But let's see Rashi. Demila shaloi bizmana, premature bris. I'm sorry, no, a late bris. Eina deicha Shabbos. Va'af agav the tabid var mitzvah. Although the act was a mitzvah, shahayatarad ba'isai Shabbos. He was busy doing brising. We touched kachta, and as a result of his involvement in brising, he made a mistake. Bazeh. Va'af bazeh asa mitzvah, and it was a mitzvah. So although it wasn't what he intended to do, it was a mitzvah, because this is the baby that's already over 8 days old. Shari ro'yuhu lamol, the baby warrants a bris. Elasheina deicha Shabbos. Severe leila Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, ta'a b'dvar mitzvah. If you made a mistake in the midst of a mitzvah, and the mistake was also v'asa mitzvah, was a mitzvah. However, sheyesh b'chiyav chatas, there is a chiyav chatas for the action, chayiv, even though it was ta'a b'dvar mitzvah, v'asa mitzvah. He's in the act of a mitzvah, and a mitzvah was done. But if ultimately the action was not meant to have been done, chayiv chatas. Rabbi Shua says no. The Sevirale, he believes ta'a b'dvar mitzvah, v'asa mitzvah. If you made a mistake while you intended to do a mitzvah, and you actually did a mitzvah, you're potter. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz's language, and I may have to then call it a day. Rabbi Elazar deems him liable to bring a sin offering as circumcision after its appointed time. Oh, he doesn't give all the language. Doesn't override Shabbos. Rabbi Shua exempts him since he intended to perform a mitzvah. And despite his error, in fact, performed the mitzvah. He is exempt. This is the beginning of the discussion at the end. A fascinating question where a person made a mistake in the process of doing a mitzvah, and the results of his action was a mitzvah, but simultaneously also prohibited. I just want to give you a sneak preview. The Mishnah here says, Rabbi Yeshua Paiter, Rabbi Elazar Mechayev. Chayev. Rav Huna Masni Chayev, Rabbi Yehuda Masni Pater. There's a debate in the language of the Mishnah itself. And so Hashem's help, beyond the time that we have left, next Monday, Be'ezer Hashem, we will continue this Gemara, analyzing the Mishnah and probing the depths of the question of culpability when it was entirely a mistake. Now, I want to just make one more clarification. To understand the Gemara, I've been blaming it on the parents, which is a likely way that the events unfolded. But the Mishnah doesn't explicitly say that was the way the event unfolded. So there are a multitude of possible scenarios that could have led to this mistake. The bottom line is the Moel, with the very best of intentions, not just the best intentions, the Moel likely traveled from a long distance and it was inconvenienced. He was sleeping on somebody's floor on Shabbos. They didn't have a lot of hotels back then to do the bris. So the Moel really, really, really is a good guy here. Unfortunately, mistakes happen. And the Judaism, for better or for worse, has a position that even inadvertent mistakes, there is a degree of teshuvah warranted. You don't beat yourself up. You don't have to jump off a cliff. Well, no one should ever, God forbid. But there is a ritual teshuvah process for even mistakes that are done, with the exception of an ones. If you are compelled into doing something that is prohibited, that would be a different story. And so now the question becomes, what would have had to happen? And we're not going to give the answer now, but what would have had to happen in that scenario for it to be considered an ones? Is there any degree of being misled that would totally exempt the mohel? So that's a discussion that we should have on Monday, Be'ezer Hashem. And so, my dear friends, I want to wish you a wonderful Shabbos. Only good news. I'll tell you, actually, I'll close with something interesting. A friend of mine had a close relationship with a tzaddik, a Soviet moyel, who was called the Ribnitzer Rebbe. I don't think he had Chassidim. He was very engaged in Chesed. He looked after the people that fell through the cracks. And it was his yard site yesterday. And so 2 days ago, a friend of mine called me and said, it would be very meaningful if I could find the Torah that's puzzled, that was disregarded from that region, fix it up, and give it to the base medrash that's in his honor in Muncie. Could you reach out to contacts in Moldova? So I called Chabad in Moldova. I left a message. So the guy calls me back and he says, first of all, Torahs, they were all cleaned out. Unfortunately, enterprising Jews came in the 90s after the fall of communism, and they took all the Torah. They basically emptied all the old shuls of Sefer Torah. No judgment, because I don't know enough, but it doesn't sound like a very wholesome act, but it is what it is. It is what it is. That's the story. But the rabbi tells me, you're not going to believe this, but I just landed in New York. And one of the reasons why I'm in New York is I am trying to figure out where there's a community an hour away from Rivnitz. Rivnitz has no Jews anymore. There are many very impoverished Jews, and we've started to do exhaustive Chabad work there, and primarily it's chesed. There are a lot of very impoverished people, so they provide helping them pay for their fuel in the winter and other things. It's an impoverished time under good times, and now there's all this turmoil. And he said, actually, that community needs a shul, needs a Torah themselves. Not only there are no Torahs to sell, there are no Torahs left. But he's like, actually, I'm in town now because we need to rebuild. They have a place there that they're going to build a base medrash and a soup kit and a kitchen and a soup kitchen. And he's like, I take this as a very big sign of siyata d'shmaya that I land in New York. We have to work on this project. And I got a message to call a Jew in Florida who's interested in helping do something to honor the legacy of the Rivnitz. And so I called the Jew. I said, listen, there's no Torah, but there may be another mitzvah opportunity. So what happens next, I don't know, but I'll keep you posted. You never know. Sometimes
10,002.
Hashem always runs the show. Sometimes you get to see how, things that seem random are not random. So who knows?
Rabbi, it's right to the point, because this is the other side of the coin. Who gets the credit instead of who gets the blame?
I'll
Yep.
tell you who's going to get the credit. If this year decides to give a donation and renovate a kitchen that's going to serve hungry people, he'll get all the credit. And I'll get the good feeling of knowing that every once in a while I get to be in the middle of beautiful acts of chesed. All right, well, that's it. So now it's 10:30. My dear friends, I want to wish you a wonderful Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Always be in a position of helping and giving, and Hashem should bless all of Klal Yisrael. Have a wonderful.
Rabbi,
Can I just say one thing?
One thing, sure.
Thank you, Rabbi. We're starting a new chapter, Bereshis. Let's continue to the end of the next year.
Thank you, Dr. Pasternak. There's no chumash today. So we'll have to run out.
Rabbi, if this gentleman wants to collect funds from TNX, tell him to give me a call. I can set him up with a certificate.
Well, you'll have to first vet him, make sure that he.
Yeah, I would vet him. Well, you're my vet.
Again, passing. Who's responsible? Always the same thing.
Dr. Yashikaya.
Rabbi, I'll see you this year, the Chabura on Wednesday. Unfortunately, Monday, Tuesday, I won't be able to make it. So
We're going to miss you, but we'll wish an abundance of Besuras Toivus,
right.
and
Good
look
Shabbos.
forward to your return.
Have simchas.
All right, Shkach, everyone. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.